April showers bring May flowers, so let's jump into a quick and easy wildflower painting. At the end, I'll go over some ways to switch these flowers up ever so slightly to create a variety of different looks. I'm starting out with dioxazine purple, a fairly watery consistency, and I'm just using my brush to create a few oval-shaped petals. These will be from the side view, not straight on, so the petals won't go all the way around for these. It's more like painting half of a flower. I'm using a size 00 brush, but this still works fine if you don't have a brush quite this small. I have used larger sizes. I would recommend either a round brush, a liner brush, or a rigger. Don't try too hard to make your petals all the same. The variations actually make it more interesting. And while most of the purple petals are filled in, I do like to leave areas of white here and there. You can see how my flowers are facing all different directions. This will make it more fun when it comes time to paint those stems. Now I'm coming back with the darker shade of purple, and I'm simply dropping it into the base of the petals, right about where they'll be meeting the stems. Because the paint is still wet, the new color spreads just a bit. Make sure your brush is not too wet for this step. Releasing drops of water into our petals will not help us here. Gravity wants to pull this down, so I'm just going to assist with a light touch and we'll get the paint back where we want it. Now let's move on to the stems. I'm using Undersea Green, which is one of the newest paints I've added to my color palette, and I love it. I've been using it so much. Paint consistency is important for a smooth stem, and I like to fill my brush with enough paint and water that I can make it all the way down in a single stroke. You can see how my stem on the far left was getting a little dry towards the end, and I lost some of that smooth look. Do you notice how the overlaps and different angles make it more natural than just a cluster of flowers all lined up side by side? For the leaves, I'm using Perylene Green, though you can stick to a single color for both stem and leaves if you prefer. I'm adding just a touch of this darker color to the underside of my stems and leaves. And once again, make sure you have some fun with the different directions and the angles. I'm just raking my brush along here. I don't want to get too much paint on. Using a brush that's almost dry works really well for this technique. And now for the final touch, we're just going to add a small drop of the darker green, not too much water, to that point where the stem meets the flower. And because my paint is still a little bit wet, you'll see some of that spreading with the purple and the green mixing together. Okay, I realized that I didn't include a single front-facing flower, so let's go ahead and add one in now. So I think I'll be putting maybe around 4 to 6 petals on here, and while they will be somewhat oval in shape, I like to make sure there are plenty of imperfections. Do you see where my brush left the page on that stem and I had to come back and continue the line? Well, I think I'm just going to go ahead and throw a leaf in right there. All right, that looks good. Now I'm going to be adding that darker value to the center at the base of the petals. And a touch of Perylene Green. Okay, now let's get into the ways we can use the same tutorial, the same basic formula, and mix things up. So for this first example, I was a little bit more precise with the shapes of my petals, and I also waited for them to dry completely before adding the darker value. so there wasn't any spreading like the one that we just painted. So it comes down to whether you like more control over your painting or loose, unexpected results. Next up, I added some paint splatters as well as a rough, grungy border to this one. Now let's get into some other colors. This one only uses Venetian red and undersea green. It's very simple, but I like this one a lot. And for this yellow flower painting, I'm going to focus on the partial bloom. So I only painted about 1.5 petals, and I brought the green farther up, so it looks like a flower that's just starting to bloom. Here we have some larger, fluffy versions. I made almost no attempt to separate the petals, and I used 3 colors, all wet and wet, yellow, orange, and red, so it's a very different look. Well, I hope you enjoyed this demonstration, and I'd love to hear about the variations that you come up with while painting these sweet spring wildflowers.